Welcome to Super Sunday. If you're new to church, if you've never been to Anthem, we're so glad that you're here. I will just say, not every Sunday do we have Mario and Luigi necessarily out there to greet you in the lobby, but here's the reason why we do it. The next generation matters. And they need to know that they have a church family that loves them, that celebrates them, that's excited about them being here. And whether it's the popcorn with candy in it, that is not what my daughter needs. I mean, I'm like, popcorn, cool. And then they're pulling out these sour worms and M&Ms. I'm like, oh, man, this is going to get crazy. So kids that are in service today, if you're in here, I don't know how you're going to be sitting still. That'll be a trick. Hey, I want to just recognize some people this morning before we go any further. If you serve in any way, if it's once a month, if it's once every week, whatever capacity, if it's hosting, if you help with kids ministry around here, or student ministry, or college in any way, would you stand up? Let's recognize all these volunteers that are in here right this morning. Yes, thank you. Thank you guys so much. There's 78 kids, workers. There's a lot of kids that run around these hallways, and it takes 78. So, 15, 20 people staying up. That's representative of the other 80 that are out working in other areas. We've got around 10 student volunteers. There's 6 or 7 working with college. We believe in the next generation, and we don't want it to be just a sign on the lobby outside that says we would give our best to the next generation. We want to live it out and give the very best we can to the next generation. Well, like I said, my name is Andrew, and I get a chance to share with you guys again. I'm really excited to start off with something that very well could be divisive in our church. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan, okay? So thank you. I got some supporters in here. I don't want to cause any division in the church. The Lord does not like that, but I love the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm 37 years old. It's been a long time since the Cowboys won the Super Bowl. But in the early 90s, they were awesome, okay? Let's just go back to down memory lane a little bit. They had Troy Aikman as the quarterback. And just as a complete side note, when I worked at AT&T, I just quit AT&T about a year ago, a lady called in and she had a password on her account when I opened it up, and I said, what's your favorite hero? And she said, Troy Aikman. And I said, what's your 4-digit passcode? She said, 8888. And that was, she loved, and she actually, on a complete side note, she changed her last name to Aikman after she had gone through a rough time with her husband. And I'm serious. I'm not even kidding. So I say I love the Cowboys, but I don't know if my devotion is that deep. But I'm trying to pass this love on for the Cowboys to my son. My son, speaking of 8, he's 8 years old right now. His name is Nathan. And 4 years ago, the Dallas Cowboys, kind of in a miraculous way, because it didn't happen very often anymore, they made it to the playoffs. And they were playing at home against the Detroit Lions. And I took Nathan there. And we were sitting up in the nosebleed sections, and I've got video proof of him loving the Cowboys. He was waving that towel. He was screaming his guts out, and they actually won that playoff game. And I'm driving home going, there's no way that he's ever not going to love the Dallas Cowboys now. I just thought I'd done it. Until the next season. In game 2, Romo breaks his collarbone, and they bring in some backup quarterbacks that apparently, I'm not sure where they got those backup quarterbacks, but they didn't do a very good job, and they went 4-12 instead of 12-4. And all of a sudden, at the end of the season, my son is like, I kind of think I like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. I'm like, son, you have got to be kidding me. I've all this time invested in you to be a Cowboys fan, and you're going to go for the Buccaneers? And so I say all that to say this, hey, investing in the next generation, what you impress on them, it matters. But there's a lot more important stuff that we want to impress on people, right? And I'm here to tell you and to declare to you that there is no one more worth our time than Jesus, to invest him into the next generation. Like my professor in college said in the most monotone voice and as excited as he could, say, when they call a God conference, Andrew, there's only one that shows up. Hallelujah. That's how he talked. There's only one. You call it a big conference of gods to come together, guess who shows up? There's only one. And that is what we have to impress in this next generation. And so today, if you've got your Bibles, we're going to go to the book of Judges. In the Old Testament, we're going to be in chapter number 2 of the book of Judges. And if you don't know anything about the Bible today, We're so glad that you're here, but I want to just give a little explanation, especially when we read books like the book of Acts. That, if you don't know about the Bible, that's kind of freaky. What's the book of Acts about? Or the book of Judges, what is this going to be about? You could just basically say that the book of Judges, a judge in this time was basically a person that God would raise up to help the people of Israel when they were having problems with other countries that were coming around them and kind of invading them and overtaking them. So you can almost think of it as like a deliverer. Some of them were guys, some of them were ladies, and they helped Israel. But that's who the judges were. And we're going to be in chapter number 2. And before I get into this, I want to give you just a little bit of context of what's going on. So you know the country of Israel that's on the map today, right? That is the same Israel that's in the Bible that we're talking about today. It's the same exact people, the same lineage. It's all the same story. This is a real story. The Bible's not a bunch of stuff that's made up. It's all historically proven and it's real. But the people of Israel were in bondage, big time, to the Egyptian people. And in the sense of bondage, I'm talking major slavery, beating them, making them build these huge empires, all these kind of things. And they were crushed for 430 years by the Egyptian people. And one day, we know a story of a guy by the name of Moses, that God appeared to him and said, I want you to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And we know that Moses said, well, you know, I can't talk. All these excuses. And God said, I want you to go. And so God sent Moses, and through a mighty display of miracles, I'm talking crazy stuff happening, turning the Nile River that is also on the map today into blood, to piles and piles, and this would scare the daylights out of me, frogs. I don't like frogs. The Bible says there were so many frogs that when they died, when God stopped the plague, they were in mounds. Just huge. I'm thinking like a bulldozer's got to come and just push all these frogs into the Nile River. They were everywhere, to the plague of the firstborn, and to finally God split a sea in half and brought people out of bondage into the land of Israel, into the promised land. And so this is what's going on. God used Moses, and then Moses passed away, and now Joshua took the reins. And they had actually just crossed into what they call the promised land, where God had promised them that all these other countries lived, that he would bring them there. They had just crossed the Jordan River miraculously as well. And now Joshua has divided all the land up to give to the Israelites. And that's where we pick up this morning in verse number 6 of chapter 2 of Judges. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And so you can see in this passage that I want to go back and say something else, that after God had brought the people out of Egypt across the Red Sea, within like 3 or 4 days, guess what was happening? Can I remind you that they just actually walked through a sea on dry ground? The sea was split in half. According to the cartoon, like King of Pharaoh, it's like you could see the wells and the things, swimming beside you. And they walk through, and 3 days later, they don't have anything to drink. And they start grumbling. Like, oh, God, why did you bring us out of Egypt? Now we're just going to die out here in the desert where there's not enough graves in Egypt. And just complaining. And God's like, okay, I'll take care of you. He got some fresh water for them. And then before long, then they're getting hungry. And they're like, why did we leave Egypt? At least we had some food to eat. And they started complaining again. And you just see this cycle of God and these Israelite people. The Israelites would just completely complain, and God would supply. They would complain, and God would supply. They would complain, and God would supply. And finally, one day, God said, listen, they had sent out some spies into the promised land, and they decided that they couldn't take it over. And God said, no one that's past the age of 20 is going to enter into the promised land. I had enough. So these people that are crossing into the promised land, some of them had been slaves in Egypt. Not all of them had. Some of them had been. And so, but they knew what had happened. They had heard the stories you would have imagined from their parents. But all of a sudden in verse 10, the most terrifying thing that I think I could ever imagine reading, said this: after a generation of people who had seen God move in miraculous ways, another generation grew up that neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. You had a generation of people who could taste the salt water from the Red Sea. You had a generation of people who were like walking by piles of frogs in Egypt and going, this is crazy. God, you are on our side. You had a generation of people who had a fire guiding them at night and a cloud guiding them during the day as God led them where they needed to go. And the next generation somehow said, we're not sure who God even is. And you got to wonder, what in the world happened? How did something that drastic happen so fast? And I think I've got a clue, and Drew Files preached a few weeks ago and shared a little bit. So I want us to flip back, because I think there's a clue in Deuteronomy chapter number 6. So if you've got your Bible, to flip back a couple more books into the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy. And we're going to be in chapter 6 and read verse number 4 through 9. I wonder if somehow this could have happened. It said this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. And then he says this: impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Basically, everywhere you go, anytime you got a chance, tell them about me. And I just wonder, and if I was completely honest, and for those of you that are young parents in here in the same boat that I'm in, and for those of you who are not young parents and you've kind of got the kids out, or some of you that haven't had kids yet, it is not easy. I don't know, sometimes when we first had our first kid, looking at Crystal going, babe, I know there's 6 billion people on the face of this earth, and they all have parents, but why? Why? Why did we do this? It's hard. It's hard work. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and they're hangry. Sometimes you're going to bed and they're fussy. It's like all the time. And I think what could have happened, if they're like me, you want to tell them about God. I want to tell them about how amazing He is. I want to read the Bible story to them. But guess what? We just had like a complete meltdown at bath time. And they're kicking, they're screaming, and it's not all this bad, but they're doing all these crazy things. They don't want to brush their teeth. They don't want to brush their hair. I want mama to brush it. No, I want daddy to brush it. No, and it's just like you ready to pull your own hair just out. I want you to just go to bed tonight. I'll read the Bible tomorrow. And I'm not putting any guilt trip on anybody because I've done this. But I just wonder, then the next morning you wake up and you just say, I'll do it the first thing tomorrow because I'll be refreshed. And they'll be ready to eat Lucky Charms. And then you give them Lucky Charms and they get the sugar rush and they're going crazy and they're not ready to hear anything. And you know what's crazy is when we moved to Tulsa about 9 years ago, we were looking for a church. And all of you guys are in here, I'm preaching to the choir because you're here. But it was crazy how fast 1 week turned into a month of us not going to church like that. It was so fast, it was scary. Because we're looking for a church. Well, today I think we'll just stay home. We're starting a church at our house. That's got to, it's got to count for something. But we were dying for community, and we somehow just didn't go. And then it was easy the next morning. Sunday. I was like, man, that actually felt kind of nice to sleep in a little bit longer. And then the next thing you know, we're just kind of not there after a month. And there's this analogy, and I'm not a sailor at all. So I hope this analogy works, but they say that if you get off like 1 degree on where you're wanting to go, if you put your ship that I wanted to go here and you're off by 1 degree, as you travel hundreds of miles, how far 1 degree takes you off a course of where you wanted to be. And it happens in every area of our lives. It happens with people saying, I don't know how I ended up in this adulterous affair. I don't know how this sin crept up in my life over here, but it all can start by just one tiny decision. And all of a sudden, over the course of time, or find ourselves where we didn't want to be. And a whole generation woke up and said, I have no idea who God is. Was it the parents' fault? Maybe it was some of that. Was it the people not taking responsibility for their own walk for God? Maybe it was some of that too, but I believe the big onus had to have been somehow everywhere you went, all the time, you somehow just didn't get a chance to impress it on your kiddos or on the next generation to go. I just got to tell you before we go to bed tonight, I want to remind you, every firstborn child in Egypt was killed, and we didn't have anybody killed. Or there was a massive plague. Guys, I want to remind you that there was a plague and every single livestock in Egypt died, but every one of ours lived. Before you go to bed, don't forget that we were guided by that fire. We were guided by that cloud, just reminding them. And how many times in the Old Testament did it say, set up a memorial, remind them, remind them, remind them. And today we're saying as a church, we want to give our very best to the next generation. Because if we don't impress it, if we're not intentional, what will happen is in 5 or 10 or 20 years, you think they're going in the right direction, and all of a sudden they're off course. And we have to be intentional about investing in the next generation. So you're like, Andrew, all right, man, chill out. Well, I am the youth pastor, so I do have a passion for the next generation in general, but I think we all do, right? That we don't want to see all of a sudden a whole country of people that have no idea who God is, not even a clue of who he is. And you're like, well, why does this all matter? Well, let's keep on reading in the book of Deuteronomy and back to Judges. Let's try to do that again. Judges, chapter number 2. Why does it matter that we pass this on? It says in verse number 11, then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They served gods that weren't even gods. And I'm just going to tell you, we, in our city, in the Bible Belt, when I drive different places and I see like Buddhist or Hindu gods painted on the side of buildings in downtown Tulsa, and I know that there are Hindu temples here, there are mosques as well, there's somehow we've got a disconnect of Christians passing their faith on to the next generation in a real vibrant way. And not just I want to teach you some knowledge and maybe do some Bible trivia with you, but I'm talking like a real living passing the faith on that this is how Jesus actually interacts in my life. And this is how alive he actually is. And it breaks my heart. And I know that this is the result of it. It says that the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them up out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths, which are other just idols. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. So why does it matter? Because if you drift away, if you're not intentional about giving Jesus to the next generation, it doesn't just turn into, well, I just decided I don't want to be spiritual. It can turn into idol worship. And Jesus said, if you're not for me, you're against me. But I want to give you guys some hope this morning that you're doing a great job. This church is doing a great job of investing into the next generation with 78 volunteers, like I said, helping out in kids, 10 at least helping out with youth, 6 or 7 helping out with college age. But I just want to encourage you and impress on you that we have a God that's worth talking about to the next generation. He's alive. And I remember my grandparents, Grandma and Papa were their names to me as I grew up. My dad was out of the picture, but we would spend a lot of time at Grandma and Papa's house, and they impressed some stuff on me. One of those things was in the garden, and they would impress on me how to pick green beans. And I'd be out there, and man, it's hot in the middle of Texas picking up some green beans. I'm bending over, and I'd literally just pick like 20, because I'm like, I am not going to be out here that long. And I'd walk in with my green beans, and Grandma would say, there's more green beans out there. And I'm like, I don't see any green beans. She's like, come out there, let me show you. So she'd go out there and she would get me down there. She said, you got to look underneath here. You got to see all these green beans. And there was literally, seeming in my mind, like hundreds of them that were still there. I mean, I didn't want to do the work, but they impressed on me hard work. Another thing they did was help me pick tomatoes and help me understand that I was colorblind. Because my grandma said, Andrew, go pick the reddest tomato that you can out of that garden. And I said, all right, I'm on it, Grandma. I go out there, I cut that tomato off, bright green tomato. I bring it inside and she says, I said red. I go, this is red. And she said, it's green. And I said, there's something wrong with my eyes then, Grandma. And I should have known, okay? I should have known. I didn't really take a colorblind test until later. But I was in college dating this beautiful young lady named Crystal. And I looked deep into her eyes as we were dating, and I just said, I want you to know that you have the most beautiful green eyes I've ever seen. Thankfully, she didn't say they were red. She said, thank you, they're brown. And I was like, I ruined that moment really bad, okay? So that helped me with my colorblind thing, but the other thing my grandparents did that would impressed on me was this, and I want to encourage you to do the same. I would go over there on a morning in the summertime, and I'd come in there, and they would have this blue sofa couch there, and my grandma would have her Bible, and she had this devotional, and she'd say, come over here and sit down with me. And begrudgingly, to be honest with you, I was like, okay, Grandma, you know, come over, sit next to Grandma, and she would pull out this devotional in her Bible, and she'd just start sharing with me. And I remember I memorized this 23rd Psalm. I gave my kids $5 for memorizing the 23rd Psalm. I got a stack of notebook paper. That's what that did. But she said, Andrew, I want you to memorize this. And then she realized I had a really bad, lazy attitude. And she said, come here, Andrew. You know what the word slothful means, Andrew? I was like, no, Grandma. And she said, Andrew, you need to work. You can't be lazy to sit on here watching cartoons all day long. And she read this scripture to me, and then she said, I want you to get out there in the garage with Papa and help him. And I actually never forgot that. And my work ethic that I have today is because of Grandma telling me about what it means to be slothful. And apparently that means you're moving real slow. Okay, for those who don't know what a sloth is, okay? You're real lazy. And the last illustration I just want to share with you guys is probably the most potent and powerful to me was my grandpa was a pastor of a little church, no bigger than probably this section right here. And I remember going to church. There was a back hallway with some classrooms in it, and there was some chalkboards in there that I was thinking I was going to go in there and just color and doodle, well, like I always did before church started. And I remember going in there, and my grandpa, Papa, was on his knees crying out to God. I'm not talking like he was just saying, Jesus, I just want you to come hang out with me today. He was seeking Jesus to have him come and to touch people's lives at that service, and I'll never forget it. And so I just want to encourage you, the little things that you're trying to do, and I know it's hard, and it takes death sometimes. Death to our time, death to some of our resources, death to the football game that I want to get back to so bad. To take time and to impress on the next generation, to say, Jesus is worth following. I promise you he's worth it. This is how I've seen him faithful in my life, and he'll be faithful in your life just the same. And impress it on him. And you know the story of the salmon or the trout, one of the two fish that will basically swim downstream and they'll hang out in the ocean for a little while. And when it's time to spawn, they have to swim back upstream before they can get to a spot that's shallow enough to actually spawn and be able to lay the eggs so that they can produce their offspring. And most of them, if not all of them, end up dying. But out of that death comes hundreds of new fish. And I just want to encourage you today, if you're not serving in some way, pouring into the next generation, I just want to encourage you to do it. And I have this conversation all the time in my own self going, I don't really know personally what I've got to give to anybody. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to parenting all that great. I don't know how to raise children all that great. I'm doing the very best that I know how, but I don't think I've got anything to give to another person. And I just want to tell you that if you're in this room and you're following Jesus and you've been following maybe just another week longer than somebody else, and you've got something to give. If you've got kids that are actually older and grown up and they're following after Jesus, you've got something to give. If you've got a family, you've got something to give, and it matters to people. The next generation is counting on us to give the very best we've got to them. We can do it with Jesus' help. And so I want to just share just a couple of practical things that I think we can do. And then I want to tie it up in the end with one last scripture. Tim Keller said this: here is how we're going to pass on our faith to the next generation. Love God passionately. Be passionate about following Jesus, whatever passionate looks like in your life. Don't let your faith be something that sounds like a drudgery. All right, guys, we're going to go to church today, I guess. But trust me, we'll get back as soon as we can, and we'll get back to that football and cartoon game. It's going to be great, guys, I promise. Jesus was the most passionate person I've ever read about and ever met. He was passionate about seeking after us. Live your life with passion for Jesus, that people see you and go, dude, all right, he's serious about following after Jesus. Whatever that passion looks like, but love God passionately in front of your kids, in front of this next generation, everywhere you go. Secondly, impress truths practically. What does that mean? That means like Grana. When she wanted to tell me about slothfulness, she pulled me in there and she showed me how it actually interacted with my life. There's a reason why. She was like, there's a reason why God says to work hard. And if you don't work, you don't eat. That's what she basically told me. I was like, I'm working. I love to work, Grana. That's my favorite. It intersects. There's a reason why it matters. It's not just a bunch of facts. And I love to do Bible trivia with my kids on the way to school all the time. I'm like, do you want easy, medium, or hard? They're like, Eden's like, I want easy. I'm like, all right, who died on the cross? Jesus. All right, going on to the next one, okay? Do all that stuff. But I don't want my kids to just know facts about them. I want my kids to know them. And I know that that's the same in our lives. We don't want our kids to just win a Bible trivia match. I want them to know that when they pray, Jesus hears them. I want them to know when a person's not feeling good that they can pray for them and they can ask God to move in their lives. And I want them to know that whenever we're going through financial hardship and I don't know what to do and I don't know how to pay the next bill, that we go to Jesus and Jesus moves and he miraculously provides for us. But I want them to see it practically. And then I want us to give testimony personally. Not, this is what God did. This is what I read about God doing a long time ago. I want my kids to see in my life and your lives, this is what God does today. When we took a team of people to China just a few months ago, and there was a lady there that was blind in one of her eyes, we just got around her and prayed and said, Jesus, if you're still the same yesterday, today, and forever, then apparently, and you healed in the Bible, then apparently you can still do it today. And we gathered around this lady, and we just prayed that God would intervene in her life. And we got done, and she said something in Chinese we didn't understand, and the missionary just said, guys, I don't know how to explain it, but she can see. She just said she can see out of her eye again. And I want my kids to hear personal testimonies of how Jesus is moving today, not he used to move a long time ago, because we want a living, active faith to give to the next generation, right? Not some, Jesus, he's good, but you know what? If you decide to choose something else, it's actually okay. So these are the three things. Love God passionately, impress truths practically, and give testimony personally. And I want to just end by saying this. A few weeks ago, I talked about how Joshua, the same guy we're talking about here, he said this to the people of Israel. He said, choose this day whom you're going to serve. But as for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. And it's your choice. And what's crazy about it is actually God knew that they weren't going to follow him. And he was kind enough and gracious enough to send these judges and ultimately to send Jesus to help us, all of us who've wandered away, to say there's forgiveness. And his name is Jesus. And so Psalm chapter 145, verses 1 through 4, I want to read this in closing. Why does it matter that we pass our best on to the next generation? David said this, I will exalt you, my God the King. I will praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise you and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. I'm here to tell you, if you don't know who Jesus is in this room and you're not a follower of him, I just want to tell you, great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. I was sitting in Starbucks and this girl was sitting there talking to me, and she said, I kind of grew up and my mom said choose whatever I wanted to choose about religion, and I'm kind of looking at Hinduism a little bit at Buddhism. And I'm just here to declare to you that there was no other God that came down to rescue people and to rescue humankind. You can work your tail end off the rest of your life. You can do all the right things and give all the money you want to and say all the right things, but I'm telling you that Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven. And he knew we were going to stray away. That's what's crazy about it. In Joshua, it says they all said, we will follow you. We choose just like you, Joshua. And look in the next book what happened. A whole generation just said, no, we're going to serve Baal. We're going to serve these other gods. And I'm just here to tell you, there's no God like our God. He is our rescuer. He's worth it. And it says, great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He deserves our best. And his greatness, no one can even fathom. And may this be true of Anthem Church, that one generation commends your works to the next generation. May they see us and they say, my parents loved God. May they see me on my knees. May my kids see me seeking after God, loving him passionately. And may they see you doing the same. And if you're in this room and you say, man, Andrew, I walked in this place because I was here for some other reason. I got invited to come. I'm just here to tell you, you're not here by accident. Jesus is after humankind because of his love. And he wants every tribe and every tongue and every person to get a chance to know him. And he's worth it. He is worth it. So God, help us to give our best to the next generation. They need it. I need it. Let's pray.